Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I am honored to have Eric Oberembt with me. Eric is a business owner, the owner of D&M Roofing. Additionally, he is a podcast host and an author of a book. And one of the things that I think you're going to be able to take away throughout Eric's story is how there is power in being unique and yourself. And it's tough, but there's power in it. So, Eric, thanks so much for being on today, my man.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
You bet. Now, to kick off your story, when you're a young boy, you move in with your grandparents. So talk a little bit about, that phase of life and just the impact that, living with your grandparents, grandpa specifically had on you.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was about 7, my parents got divorced and me and my sister and my mom moved in with my grandma and my grandpa. And for all intents and purposes, Grant became my dad, right?
Yeah.
And by the time I was 10, he had me up on roofs. He owned D&M Roofing, started it back in the mid 60s, and was an old tar and gravel roofing company. So he had a flatbed truck and a kettle. And when I was 10, I started getting up on old gravel roofs and learning how to put plastic around soil pipes and, do the hard work. And I literally started doing that when I was 10 and kind of started getting that work ethic from him at that time.
I love it. Now, one of the things I always find interesting is having an aspect of sales as a young person. So when you were young, you had around 10, you had sold a $500 remodel. So talk a little bit about, getting that first sale and learning a little bit about what that was like.
So that was actually, that was when I turned 16.
16, okay.
I had been driving around with my grandpa for years, right? Like watching him sell jobs. And back then, there was no sales process, right? There was no universities like we all have now and like learning about one-step closes and all the stuff, that goes with that. It was just building relationships, right? And it's funny because if you watch all the training that's out in the world now, what do they talk about? Building relationships, right? We kind of had this window where everybody went away from that. And it was like, shove shit down people's throat and try and get them to sign and put it in front of them and have a pen on it and and all that stuff that, we've all learned. But back then it was build relationships, make friends, and you'll work together. So when I turned 16, got my first truck. Well, I got my first truck when I was 15 because, you live out in the sticks somewhere, you can drive when you're 15. But when I turned 16 and got my real license, my grandpa he literally gave me a yellow pad of paper with some addresses on it. And he said, go sell that. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And he's like, yeah, go, you watch me long enough, go sell it. And I'm like, okay. And I remember driving down to Dundee area in Omaha, and all those little houses have these little flat garages that are off to the side. And they all back then were old tar and felt roofs. And so you could sell them a recoat. Like you said, you could sell them this little recoat for like $500. And that was what my grandpa back then used to call track money. So he would go sell a bunch of little recoats that we do. They take, 2 hours to get done. And we get track money to go to Exarban so we could play the ponies.
I love it. Now, I want to highlight what you said, and that is, it's a relationship, right? And there's so many different types of sales, right? I mean, today there are still sales that are very, we'll say transactional, and then there's a ton of it that's very relational. And I think sometimes sales can get this negative connotation, and at the end of the day, there's a book out there, and it's called To Sell Is to Be Human, right? And it's like, at the end of the day, no matter what world you're in, some people are direct sales where like maybe their paycheck or their business relies on it, but then everyone's in sales, right? You're selling yourself to get promoted. You're selling yourself to get in a relationship, right? You're always selling yourself. So talk a little bit about being relational and the sales process.
Yeah. So I'm very intentional with my business and everything else that I do. And when I'm teaching my people and teaching my guys and gals how to quote unquote sell, I also coach at the Commercial Roofing Academy out in Colorado. And every 2 months we have a quick start program. And literally 80% of what we talk about is building relationships. When people get the wrong idea, I think, just to use my industry, for example, right? When you're talking about selling like residential roofs on homes, right? Part of that process is people knocking doors. People may or may not like it, right? But the problem is that it is the most tried and true. I can get in front of people and talk to them, and I can have numbers, right? And it's a lot harder to say no to a conversation in person than it is over the phone. It's very easy to hang up a phone.
Yeah.
It's harder to slam a door and say screw you, right?
Right. Yeah.
They at least a conversation can start. People see that as more like direct sales as well, right? I don't. I tell every one of my people, every one of my salespeople, when you're out there and you're knocking doors and you're talking to people, the whole purpose that you're out there, if you go out there without the mentality of selling, but to go out with a mentality of I'm going to make a new friend today, you make that new friend, you're going to make that sale at the end of the day. And when it goes into commercial stuff, which is what I specialize in, it goes even further because you have to nurture these relationships for years sometimes before you'll actually get a contract on anything. Because you're talking about $500,000, million and a half dollar contracts. They're not just going to go, yeah, you seem nice, and sign a contract with you to build this giant roof. They want to know you, right? And they want you to want to know them.
Yep.
And that's, I think, the difference is that if you're genuinely trying to learn about the other human and what makes them tick and what do they care about, right? And you learn all of those things, then you're going to get this opportunity to be able to do business together.
I love it.
Is that me or you? I don't know. I've got a full signal.
I'd say I got full signal too, but either way, we're here.
Sorry.
We're fine.
Sorry about that.
Fine. It's just fine. So to kind of pick up where we were at. So in the sales side of things, though, one of the things that's really intriguing to me is becoming good at sales, right? Being the salesperson. I think the toughest part for most people is the resilience factor, right? By nature, we don't like to hear no. There's not many people that actually enjoy that. So for a lot of people, it's like, well, I like the product or I like the mission, but I don't like hearing no. And I've heard it enough. I'm done. So talk a little bit about how you train people, how you motivate people, even though you're going to hear no, to get past the no's and move on.
So one of the things that we do is I actually have them go out there to go count their no's.
Yeah. Instead of focusing on the yeses, focus on the no's.
Yep. Focus on the no's because you know you're going to get them anyway.
Yeah.
And so if you go out there and you actually do focus on them and go, okay, well, got to know. Let's go see if I get another one. Right. Because if you go out there and you're doing that consistently, and then all of a sudden at the end of the day, you're like, I got 3 yeses. Right. You're not focusing on, I only got 3 yeses. Right. You're like, look how many no's I went through.
Yeah.
And then I got my 3 yeses. And I think I don't let my people use the word grind anymore. And that's become such a buzzword, right? Is that everybody's got to grind and grind and grind. And I tell everybody, I'm like, look, what happens when things grind? Like when gears grind, they break down.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So what we need to do is we just need to be consistent.
Yeah.
So I make everybody substitute the word consistent for grind, because those are the most successful people, is when you are consistently okay getting those no's and you go count those. We'll literally put them in our KPIs of count no's in your KPIs.
Yeah.
And then we'll count your yeses after that. Because if you only got 2 no's, that means you didn't talk to that many people.
That's good. I like that. That's really good. So to get back to your story though, you're working with your grandpa, you're learning the business, but at this time you decide, well, I guess it's just the normal thing to do. I should go try college. And so you pick UNL and you're going to school, and then one day there's just not a parking spot. So talk a little bit about that.
You did some research. I'm impressed. You did some research, my friend.
I try to.
Yeah, you do way better than me. So I went to UNL for about 3 years, and then I came back to Omaha because I was working so much. It was just a pain in the ass driving back and forth and whatever. And so I started going to UNL in Omaha, and I was like 2 years. I was like off and on, how we are, and I literally started, and back then this was, like early 2000s, right? So it was 100% a commuter campus, like there was no on-campus living like there is now over there. Yeah. And I was driving around that campus, and I drove around for half an hour, 45 minutes, and I parking spot. There was nothing in the garages. There was nothing on the streets. There was just nothing. And I was going to miss the class anyway. And I literally stopped and I called my grandpa and I said, Gramp, I'm done. I go, "Do you got any appointments for me?" He's like, "What do you mean you're done?" I'm like, "I'm done. Like, I'm quitting school." And he's like, "Why?" I'm like, "I can't find a parking space. This is bullshit." I was like, "I'm just finished with this shit. I'm tired of giving them my money. Like this, I'm never going to do anything with it anyway.
Right.
I've gotten what I needed to out of it. I got the social aspect out of it. I've got, I did learn something.
Yeah.
But I was always the guy that was arguing with the business professors because I was
Yeah.
like, you don't know what it's actually like out there. You're reading a fucking book to me, and
Yeah.
I was like in the trenches with my grandpa learning, as I was going.
Right.
And I was like, this is not at all the real world. And like,
Right.
I would get angry and then I'd leave, and it was just a whole thing. So it was good. Like, it was good that I had the experience.
Yeah.
But school was not meant for me. I really lean on something that, like Gary Vee says, is that like they don't build school to help build entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
Like they just really don't. They teach you how to have a job.
Mm.
And that was just something that I never wanted. I never wanted a job, but I didn't know that because nobody talks about it.
Right.
Nobody talks about the people that are hiring people. They don't teach you how to hire people, right?
Yeah.
They don't teach you how to lead those people. They might think they do, but they do not. They teach you
Right.
how to work for somebody else. And so I wanted to learn how to do that. So
Yeah.
I quit because I couldn't find a parking spot.
I love it. So as you transition away from school, once again, this isn't a new business. You've been doing it, but you start getting more and more responsibility. You want the ability to grow it. You want to have more impact on the business. Now, I always think it's a tough dichotomy whenever you join a business and someone's been doing it for a while, right? Because,
Yeah.
well, there might be this new idea that could be good, but it's not the way we've always done it. So was there any butting of heads with you and your grandpa as you started to be more full-time and really kind of trying to take some of the reins over?
Yeah, there was. I had to learn very early in life how to make something seem like someone else's idea.
That's good.
So that was the only way I was able to implement the things that I wanted to implement. I wanted to open up a coding department, right? So we could do codings, but that was going to cost us, maybe 10 grand to get equipment and get into it. And it was like, we didn't really have 10 grand at the time. We were a small operation. Um, and somehow I learned how to make him think that he came up with the idea, because I didn't give a shit. I don't care how I get to my end result, as long as I get to my end result. I
Yeah.
don't have to have the ego behind it to be like, give me credit.
Yep.
I don't give a shit about the credit. I care about the fact of, I wanted to get to C. Did I get to C?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something that holds people back, because they're so worried about credit and they're so worried about ego, and they're not concerned about, like, here's the result I want. How do I accomplish the result that I want? And
Yeah.
so I had to do that a lot. And then obviously it just started naturally happen because he started getting older.
Yep.
Right. And he didn't want the responsibility anymore,
Right.
but he still controlled the money.
Mm.
And so that was where it really got kind of hard, because he still controlled the money, and things didn't really change until he passed away. And when he passed away and I took over complete ownership of the company, everything that I had saved personally, I literally took and reinvested back into the company to be able to start growing it.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want to dive into in what you said there. One is I think oftentimes when you're in the younger phase of your life, people will discount themselves for what they're able to do because they're not the old seasoned veteran. They don't have the experience. And the reality is that you might have new, fresh ideas, but you have to take the ego out of it, right? Because if it's
Right.
like, well, you don't get me, blah, 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 and you're constantly butting heads, you're never going to get what you want out of it. But if you can, to your point, figure out a way to help them understand, well, hey, if we do this, like, here's maybe some things that can happen. And now it's their idea. You can both get what you want, but you do have to realize you got to take the ego out of that. So talk a
Right.
little bit more about that. That's good.
Well, and the other thing too is showing ROI.
Yeah.
Right. If you can show somebody an ROI, I forget who said this the other day. I think it was Sean Whalen's wife. I forget what her name, Sachs or whatever. But I was listening to something, and she was like, you want to get your man to do something, show them an ROI.
Yeah.
And that is 100% true. And it's 100% true in business as well. If you can show somebody, if we invest $15,000 into this, I can then do this, this, and this, and I can make a $150,000 ROI in 12 months. And I broke down the steps, and I did all the work
Yeah.
to show you, like, they're going to be like, oh, look at everything that you put into this.
Right.
Obviously this is going to work. And people that work for me, I have to kind of teach them that, because they come to me with these same ideas. And I put myself in that spot that I was as a young kid, coming to my grandpa, asking him questions. And they're like, hey, can we go do this? Can we buy this? Right. I remember I had somebody come up and like, hey, can we buy a brake so we can go break all our own metal and we can do this, this, and this. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I have my reasons of why no. Why don't you show me why we should?
Yeah.
If you show me why we should, then we'll invest the money into doing that. Right.
Yep.
They didn't do it.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's the big thing is show some ROI, show initiative. Sorry. And maybe that's what I'm getting at, is show the initiative of the fact that you're going to go above and beyond to show that you actually have done the research, that you know what you're talking about. Don't just assume that they're going to look at you and go, yeah, well, I trust you. Yeah, go ahead. But do that.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
No, that's really good. Now, additionally, Eric, while you're out of school now and you're working full time, who we surround ourselves with and who we're spending our social time with becomes a big impactor on where we can go career wise. And so talk a little bit about, kind of hey, here's what we're doing in work. I got all these different things going on, but then here's what's going on in my personal life and my social life.
Well, by the time I was 26, I was already divorced twice. I had an extreme drinking problem, alcoholism. After my second divorce, I started going down a really bad path of drug addiction, selling drugs, alcohol still, obviously drinking and using every night. And so to your point, I was surrounding myself with some of the worst people that you can surround yourself with, right? You don't realize the dark places that you can go in Omaha, right? Like you don't know until you're there. And I found myself in those spaces in that time of my life, and I didn't have an opportunity to yet, right? We'll get there. But I didn't have an opportunity to surround myself with these good kind of people that you're kind of alluding to.
Yeah. Well, as we're going through this phase, I think the idea of all of, whether it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's all coping with something, right? We all have something that is deep within us that we either are aware of or aren't aware of, but for some reason we're masking and coping. And I think there's so many people that are in that phase of life, maybe not every night, right? I mean, whatever it is, but they're in that phase and they're masking something. So talk a little bit about, figuring out, hey, what is really at the heart of why I'm doing what I'm doing?
What I can tell you is what it was for me.
Yes.
Right. And for me, it was fear, and I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't belong anywhere. I never belonged. I didn't belong in any groups. Even though I was in groups, I think the last time that I felt part of something was like high school football, right? And like being part of that team and winning state championships, and right, like that made you feel part of something. And then once that was gone, I was always looking for that again. And I never felt like I was part of. And so I never felt comfortable in my own skin ever. And so the only time that I could come out of that shell a little bit is if I was drinking or using. And then I was surrounded by these other people that were living this same lifestyle. So it seemed normal. Yeah. And that's the thing, that like, if there's anybody out there that's listening to this that like is living in that world, or knows somebody that is living in that world, because that might not be the people listening to your show, right? But everybody, but people that do, they know somebody that is, right? Yeah. And they're not reveling in this world. They're afraid. Yeah. They're afraid, and they want out, whether they know it or not. They want out. They don't want to be like that, but they don't have a clue how to get out of it. Yeah. And that's the scary thing. And it's the thing that I talk about this a lot. A lot of my followers are in the recovery space, because they've seen how I got out. and how we give back.
Yeah.
But I really focus a lot of my energy and my time on making sure that people understand that there is a way out. You don't have to live in that world. And if you know people that are, there's a place for them to go to.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, the other thought that I have is, what if I am somebody that has a friend, has a family member that's in that space? And once again, to your point, everyone's different. We can only speak about it
Yep.
from our perspective. But I think oftentimes you see kind of this dichotomy of the person wants help, you're offering help, but they're refusing the help, right? Because at some point you have to be willing to say, I need help, right? And people can offer, people can come to you and try and say, hey, I just don't think you're making the right life choice, or hey, I don't know that this is the best for you. But
Yeah.
until I make the decision that this isn't the best for me, that can fall on deaf ears for years, for months. So talk a little bit about, for someone that maybe has that person in their life, what's a good way to approach and, kind of discuss that where it's not off-putting to the other person.
So not to sound rude, but stop pretending that you know what they're going through.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
Right. If you're what we like to call a normie,
Yeah.
you just don't understand what it is that they're living in. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what because I have people after conferences, after speaking engagements that I do, whatever it is, they come up afterwards, and I have these moms that'll come up and be like, my boy is doing that, and I'm like, and I tried to get him to do this. And I'm like, Mom, he doesn't want to listen to you because you don't get him. You don't understand him, and you never will. You love him.
Yep.
And you care about him, and you care about what happens to him, but you don't get it. So what I tell all of those people is, find someone like me in this space that has done it, that has come through and has gotten to the other side, and introduce them to that person.
Yep.
And say, Bill used to be exactly in the same spot that you are. I understand if you're not ready to change your life, but would you be willing to listen to his story?
Yeah.
And when you sit down and you listen to another addict or another alcoholic tell their story, all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, they're telling my story. Like,
yeah.
How did that guy know exactly what I've done and what I've been? Right. And
yeah.
that changes the narrative now, because now all of a sudden that door just cracked.
Yeah.
It cracked open just a little bit. And now they're a little willing. And
Yeah.
all we need is willingness, a little bit of willingness, and let them to keep coming back and
Yep.
keep listening and keep talking and keep it an open dialogue. And when you do those things, all of a sudden you look back 2 years later and you're like, whoa, what happened to Bill?
Yeah.
Like, Bill doesn't look like shit anymore. Bill doesn't look like he's going to jump off a bridge anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And all
Yeah.
of a sudden Bill's a different person. So a lot of it is the people that are listening. If you can't relate to the person, don't pretend that you can, because
Yep.
it's disingenuous, and they're going to know that you can't, and they're going to get even more angry at you.
Yep.
Right. So find them somebody that does. Find them somebody that can. Look up an AA meeting. Go to an AA meeting yourself and try and find somebody and be like, hey, will you talk to my friend?
Yeah.
Will you talk to my son? Right. Like, if you want to really take that much initiative, like, do that.
Yep.
But don't think that you know how to do it and that you're a trained counselor or a pretend alcoholic.
Yeah. Well, and one comment I'd even make to that was, a person very close to my life went through this phase of life, and I was just like, just tell me about it, like, talk to me, because I like to go out and have a good time myself, right? And so I was like, man, you don't think you can just do it on like Fridays or Saturdays? Like, you got to do it, like Monday through
Did
Thursday.
you say that? You said that?
After he was describing it, he's like, well, I mean, I do it every night. Like, that's the problem, because I was like, well, I like to have drinks too. Like, he was, opening up to me about it. And I was like, well, I like to do it too. He's like, no, man, like, you do it on like 1 or 2 days, right? Like, I'm doing it like 7 days. And I go, well, okay, well, tell me about it. And he goes, you know how you can have a drink and then you can just go do whatever else you want? Right. He goes, the second I take a drink, like, I'm going to finish the bottle. I'm going to finish the 30 rack. Like, I mean, whatever it is, like, I'm like, it's all of it. It's not even a conscious decision. It was just like, now that I've had a sip, I'm just going full send on it. And it was just, for me, eye-opening to hear that, right? Because it's like, yeah, I've never made that decision before. Like if I have one, I'm like, do I want a second one or do I want to just be done? Right. Whereas for him, it
Yeah.
was like, no, I just took a drink and now it's like, I'm all in.
The only control, what I believe, is that the only control that we as alcoholics have is the control to not take the first drink.
Yep.
That's it. Because after we take the first one, I don't have any control about what happens after that. The reason being, and I truly believe this, is that I am built differently than you. And my DNA, for whatever reason, is built different than you, and my body reacts different. I don't know if it's serotonin or it's, you know what I mean? Like what it is, it's science, whatever.
Yeah.
But my body reacts differently, like an allergy, that when I drink or use, my body does something different and it craves more, where you can actually sit there and go, no more for me, thanks. If I say no more for me, thanks, on the outside, that's what you hear. On the inside, you hear, God, I really want another one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm angry and I'm like, and I'm fighting it, right?
Yeah.
You're not fighting it. You're just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And like, that's hilarious to me. Like watching somebody leave a half drink left and leave the bar would drive me absolutely insane. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? You don't do that. It's rude.
Yeah, that is rude. No wounded soldiers. No wounded soldiers.
Oh my God. It's like, it's insane to me. Like perfectly good alcohol sitting there. Like that's crazy. So I truly believe that like there is something a little bit physically. It's not a mental thing. It's not about willpower. And people will comment and argue on that all day long. I disagree. It's not about willpower. It's about that there's something different. But here's the good news. I know that. And because I know that, now I get to live this life of freedom because I'm not constantly battling with that shit anymore.
Yeah. Well, and so to your point, one of the most interesting things I read, so after this interaction with my friend, I like started to read some books so I could just be knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And it said that, and once again, you could debate this, right? It's just one research study, but they said the biggest predictor on whether or not a person that uses drugs and alcohol, whether they will relapse at some point in their life, is the decision or before they go out to decide that they're not going to drink versus making the decision in the moment. They said if a person has mentally prepped themselves that when they go out and someone says, hey, can I get you a beer? They've already told themselves the answer is no, versus they haven't thought about it. They go to the social function. Someone says, hey, can I grab you a drink? You're going to say, sure. Right. And then that is the beginning of it. And I was like, that's very interesting that, it's making that decision before it ever becomes the moment. Right.
Right. That's one tool in the toolbox that we are given when we go to, whether it's recovery or rehab or AA or whatever it is. But that is 100% like literally one of the things that you learn. Like I went to treatment, right? Like back in 2009, I went to treatment. And one of the things that they teach you is making a plan, right? How do you get out of a situation? Did you make the plan before? That you went into that? Do you have a car? Do you have a ride out of there so that if you feel like you have to leave, you can leave, so you don't have to be uncomfortable and anxious in that moment? And so you're absolutely correct, though. Like that is one tool, one very strong tool in a very large toolbox that we as addicts and alcoholics need to have in our life so that we can be okay.
Yes. So as we're coming out of, this season of our life, right? I can imagine that there's trust that has to be built back up within the business, right? There's relationships that you're trying to build trust back up with, probably trying to a degree, trust yourself again, right? I mean, whatever it is, but you're getting back on your feet, getting back into the business. And your grandpa, I think you had asked him maybe a question of like, so grandpa, when were you going to do something? Or, when were you going to say something? So talk a little bit about that interaction and just that season as you're coming out of this.
So about a year, I maybe had about a year sober.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with him, and I don't know if I actually asked him anything or not, but I was sitting there, and like I said, about a year sober, and he looked at me and goes, you had about a year left. And I was like, excuse me? Like, what are you talking about, a year left? And he was like, yeah, you had about a year left, and I was going to have to figure out a way to let you go because you were just too far gone. And I was like, holy shit. Like there's never anybody in my life like him that believed in me and that supported me You know what I mean? And wanted
Yeah.
the things for me that he did. And for him to tell me that, you know, like, and here's the crazy thing is that if he would have told me that before I got clean, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have changed a damn thing.
Yeah.
Nothing. I would have continued down the path that I continued down, right? I had to have certain things happen to me in the certain order that they happened to me for me to end up where I'm at today. And
Yeah.
nothing that anybody was going to tell me before was going to change all that. I had to find my bottom, and my bottom was looking at 1 to 5 years in prison. And if I wouldn't have had that moment and that bottom, I wouldn't have found my way out. So I had to do the work to rebuild those relationships, right? I had to do the work to rebuild the relationship with my grandpa. I didn't really have any other really good relationships at the time anyway. So there wasn't anything else to rebuild. It was go find new ones, because all the ones that I had currently were all drug or alcohol relationships that I had to get rid of anyway. So that was easy, right? They didn't want me around anyway, because they're like, you know, screw this guy. We don't want him around. He's boring now, right? So that was easy to get away from that, but to rebuild that one was the most important. And then to figure out how to build new ones. That's the hard part.
Yes. Now in 2013, you get married to Miss Natalie, and talk a little bit about the importance of that, and obviously now being in business together and working together.
Yeah, so got married. We met when I was about a year sober, and started dating, and I was still a totally kind of different dude than I am today, right? I mean, I was way bigger. I was, you know, I was still very, very new in being good. All right. And my wife does not have my story, right?
Yeah.
She hears my stories. Like, I mean, we've literally touched on my stories, right? But like, my stories to her literally sound like watching Scarface.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And I mean, and they kind of are similar as well. But like, she's like, the shit you did, she's like, this isn't real. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but it is real. Like, I should 100% be dead, or in jail. And it was as we've grown together over the last 9 years of marriage and 11 together, whatever it is, we've both become different people. She's become, you know, she's involved in the business, you know, on the higher level financial side. But we have figured out how to do that. And for people listening that do that, work together with their spouses, not always a good idea. I've had to tell her numerous times, like, I'm going to have to fire you. Like, we can stay married, but like, this isn't working out. Because if you can't separate the two, it makes it very hard. Like, if I come home at 5 o'clock and it's like 6:30 and she wants to talk about something she wants to bitch about from me at work or whatever, and I'm like, no, we're done. Like, tomorrow you can, but like, now it's me and you and Tegan hanging out. Like, this is what we're doing now. So like, you have to really figure out how to separate those things out, or you will become very miserable in your life. And so it's taken us a lot of time to figure out how to do that. But the life that I have today with Natalie and with my daughter, Tegan, who's 7, is just, it's the most amazing thing that I never thought that I deserved in the world. And the fact that I get to have it now, it's such a state of gratitude that I have to keep myself in a lot of the times when I start getting down, when I'm trying to build something and it's not working, or I lose, you know, I lose something, or I lose a deal or whatever it is. I have to really look back, because there was a quote somebody said the other day about, there's so many people. Well, there's so many people looking at you and obviously want your life, right? But there's also the you 5 years ago that wanted this life. And now we're bitching about this life. It doesn't mean stay stagnant and like hit a plateau and be okay with where you're at, but take a moment to self-reflect every once in a while and go, what did Eric 5 years ago dream of? Right? I couldn't have even dreamt what I'm doing today. Right. So sometimes you got to take a moment and really soak that in.
Absolutely. Well, and to your point, you know, that's always been a struggle of mine. And I think, you know, people that are, you know, high achievers, that is a struggle. And I came to this realization years ago, because this has been something I've been pondering for probably 6, 7 years now. And it was, the goals that I set, let's just use a 1 year time frame. The goals I set for myself on January 1st for 2022, the person I was at that point in time thought it would be really cool to be there by December of 2022. The problem is along the way, I leveled up as a person. I grew, I developed, and what I thought was possible and what I believed in myself could be possible changed. And so all of a sudden, when I hit that goal by December, it's like, I mean, it's cool because I said I wanted to do it, but it doesn't feel that cool because I now believe that there's something more that I can accomplish. And so
Correct.
the beauty of it is that you're hungry for more, and that allows you to never plateau because you're constantly going to the next mountaintop. The
Right.
problem is it leaves you in like a constant state of dissatisfaction because you're like, dang it. I mean, yeah, I hit it, but it's not good enough. It's not enough.
I'm really bad at celebrating wins.
Yeah.
Right. I'm really bad at that. And I'm sure you've read Relentless, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of hit me when I was reading that, and that one of the characteristics, right, of the cleaner or whatever is you win that championship and you sit in it for about 30 minutes. And then you're like, okay, so what are we doing to go win the next one? Right. Like, I don't even take the time to really enjoy. And I'm not saying I'm a cleaner and, whatever, but but I have that characteristic of, great, we did it. And I have to do a better job. A buddy of mine that owns a company out in Colorado, he and I are exactly the same with this, is that our employees will come to us and be like, look how good I did or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. Now go fucking do it again. Right. Like, but that's because that's my mentality.
Right.
And I can't necessarily expect them. I'd like them to have the same mentality, but I can't expect them to have the same one. But like, they want this big pat on the back and this rah, rah, rah. And it's like, well, yeah, good job. Like, you just made a bunch of money on that. Now go replicate it. Right. Like, keep going so that you can become that. And that's something that's hard, that I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs and high achievers, like, that's something that we get stuck in as well.
Yes, that's so good. Now, as you had mentioned earlier, you're working in the business with your grandpa, and in 2015, grandpa passes away. And so now it's yours to take over. And like you said, hey, I kind of changed my mindset of it. I really wanted to invest, double down, really get into it. So talk a bit about the growth from 2015 to where we're at now. And I mean, you just moved down to Houston and we're expanding, in different states and everything too. So talk about that.
Yeah. So when grandpa passed away, I took over the rest of the company, and there wasn't really any money in the company. Yeah. It wasn't like I was buying something worth millions of dollars. Right. I mean, all I cared about in the moment was the name, because the name meant something to me, because D&M stands for Delton Mares, and that's my grandpa's name. Right. Yeah. So, that was important to me. So I mean, at the end of the day, a business is an EIN number.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. That's what a business is. I could have absolutely torn it down, build it up, started with a new name, whatever it was, right? Like, I could have done all of that. It was important to me to keep that name and to build it into something. I had saved a very small amount of money, literally from like being the guy that we went and cashed a couple jobs. Right. And then you'd hide it in the fucking, like you'd dig a hole in the backyard. And so like, when all that happened, I maybe had like 50 or 60 grand, laying around. And I was like, all right, what can I do with this? I had no idea how to scale a company. I had no idea how to hire people. I had no idea. I knew how to do all of the things that needed to be done in the company, but I didn't know how to go get those people. So what I did everything backwards. I always do. I went and bought property so I would be forced to fill it with people.
Yeah.
Right. So I went and I took all the money that I had and I bought a property, and I was like, okay, well, now I have offices. And so I hired like 2 people to put in the offices. And I just kind of kept doing that and figuring out. I went and did a couple of retreats. I started leveling up on personal growth and development stuff, and started doing exercises where I would have to write down all of the things that I do in a day, and then score it, right? With, do you like to do it? Are you good at it?
Yeah.
Right. And then you take that score and you say, okay, I'm only going to do the things that I like to do and I'm good at, right? That give me energy. Everything else is what I delegate. Right. So then who's that one person I can afford to hire right now? I got 50,000 that I can afford to go hire a production guy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hire a production guy to take that over that I don't like doing.
Yep.
Right now, they get really good at that. Now, hopefully we're making more money because I can sell more because I'm not running production. Now I've got another 50,000 or another 80,000. Now let's go hire this to take this off my list. Right.
Yep.
So then all of a sudden we fast forward 7, 8 years, whatever it is, right, years later. And all of a sudden now I've got a full team that does everything from start to finish. And now I get to literally do exactly what I love to do, which is lead and teach and inspire the people around me to be better.
Right.
And then help them when they have a fire that needs to be put out because they just don't have the answer. Right. Eric's always got the answer because I've done this forever and I'm 100 years old, and I can help with that. But that is truly what I want to do, is to be able to give back, help. And it's not to be involved in the day to day, which is why we have Omaha fully self-sufficient. We run in Iowa. I moved down to Houston because I never wanted to see snow again.
Right.
And while I was down here, I'll be completely transparent and honest. When I moved down here, I told everybody, absolutely no intention of starting another company. I do not want another roofing company. I want no part in it. Like, Omaha's running great. That's fine. I've got 3 other things going on. I'm doing public speaking. I got the podcast. I've got this. I've got that. Like, I don't need any more shit in my life. And I'm down here and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're really good at that.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you build another team? Why wouldn't you open up another market? You've got all these connections already put together that you moved into. And so I just literally, I pulled the trigger and I said, D&M's opening in Houston. So now there's D&M Houston. I hired my first guy yesterday, literally hired my first guy yesterday. And we're going on a hiring blitz here. And then we should be doors open and knocking by February.
I love it. So one of the things that's interesting is, for you in doing the speaking, being authentic, and I think owning your story, right? I don't want to say this, but I think when things don't go quite the way we would have hoped, sometimes we can feel shame and guilt about things that have happened in our past. And we don't want to own it moving forward. We don't want to take accountability for it. And we certainly don't want to talk about it in front of people. So more people know about that in our story. That's not you.
Eric's not me.
Eric's like, hey, you know what? This happened. But guess what? Here's what I've done since then. And here's where I'm going. And you're either with me or you're not. And that's okay. But here's where I'm off to. So talk about just being willing to own that and just say, you know what? Hey, there is probably judgment that can happen from it. But guess what? That's not going to keep me in a confined box of your decision.
If somebody judges me for shit in my past, I have absolutely no time for them anyway.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, that's literally where the be authentic or get the fuck out came from. Right. The name of the podcast. It came from that because I think that if you have a story, if you have a struggle, if you have something that you went through and you figured out how to get through it, and you know for certain that there are other people that are going through the same thing, and you keep all that to yourself because you don't want somebody to judge you, I don't think there's anything on a higher level of being selfish than that. I think it is absolutely your duty and your honor. Like, you are supposed to share that story and own it so that somebody else can come out of that to allow them to be better. We were not put on this earth to just live in our own little bubble and our own little world and hope that we succeed.
Yep.
We were put here to help other people and make sure that they succeed too. Now, that being said, put your oxygen mask on first.
Yep.
Right? Put your mask on first so that you can breathe, and then give it to your neighbor. Right? So make sure you're solid first. But if you are, and you're not giving back and you're not sharing your experience, strength, and hope with other people so that they can come up with you, selfish, man. Like, I don't care who judges me for it. I get pretty animated and you know what I mean? Like, I have really tried to tone down. I don't know your show well enough, and I've tried to tone down my language today for you, but I give 0 fucks who judges my previous life. Right? I just don't care, because I know that someone is going to hear it and they're going to reach out to me, and it's going to give me an opportunity to help them to get through it. And that's the person that matters, not the person who's going, you did what? Screw you, Karen. I don't care.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't. Because
Yeah.
that person that needs the help is way more important to me than you.
Well, and I think the other piece is sometimes, in my experience personally, but also people I've met, is they don't want to share their story because they think no one will understand. And at the end of the day, everyone's story is 100% unique in their own.
Correct.
But it's also, there's a lot of overlapping. When you share your story, there's a lot of people that are like, I can relate to that, or I've been there, I understand that. And the sooner you realize that we are more alike than we are radically different, the easier it is to own the things that we're insecure about or we're afraid people are going to learn about us.
Yeah. You don't have to be ashamed of anything that happened in your past because it's what got you to where you are now.
Yep.
Right. Unless you're still making the same dumb shit mistakes. Right. Then be embarrassed about it. Right. Because you're not taking any action to be better.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Eric, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story, just all the amazing things that you've been able to accomplish and you're going to continue to accomplish with the expansion down to Houston. I can't wait to see the things, but any last, moments or things that really stand out to you that you want to make sure we highlight in your story?
Yeah. The last thing that I always bring up in every show that I ever do or anything that I'm talking about is I want everybody to know about our nonprofit.
Yes.
So I want everybody to know about Roofers in Recovery. So it's a nonprofit that Paul Reed and I started about 3.5 years ago. And Paul and I both went to a treatment facility. I was 13 years ago. He was 15 years ago. And those treatment facilities literally saved our lives. Like we would 100% be dead or in jail if we wouldn't have found those places. And we know that a lot of people don't have the means to be able to go to a treatment facility and be able to be put in that bubble for 30 days. To be able to learn and get the tools needed when they get out to be able to change their life. So we got very industry specific because we're in the roofing space, right?
Right.
And the roofing industry is what gave old, dirty roofers like Paul and I the opportunity to make good money, right? And to be able to have a lifestyle if you run a business properly. And so we wanted to focus on those people in our industry and give back. So we raise money throughout the year so that we can actually send people to treatment. And so we have online community where we have our own online recovery meetings twice a week. People from all over the country come onto our Zoom meetings in the roofing space on Tuesday nights and Thursday mornings. Yeah. And then we help people to send them to treatment. So anybody that's watching this that's in my space, National Roofers in Recovery Day is on June 2nd. And we're trying to get 150 contractors throughout the country. Last year, we had about 70 that did this. And on that day, everybody builds a roof on the same day. And you pay your subs and you pay your suppliers and you donate the profit from that roof to Roofers in Recovery. So we can have one big fundraising day because we need to raise about $750,000 to hit our goal of sending 50 people a year to treatment. So and if anybody's interested in just donating or being a part of it, it's roofersinrecovery.com to help out with that. But like, that's the thing I always want to leave with people if it doesn't come up, because that's the thing that I'm most passionate about is making sure that we're helping those people.
That's awesome. June 2nd, 2023. June 2nd. Tune in, get out there and get it done. Well, Eric, thanks again so much for being on the show, my man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.